The Shadows of Hollow Hill. The town of Hollow Hill was a place frozen in time. Nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forests, it was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were buried deep, sometimes too deep. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about the old Hollow Hill Manor, a decaying mansion that loomed on the edge of town. It had been abandoned for over a century, but its presence was felt in every corner of the community. Children dared each other to run up to its gates. Teenagers snuck in at night for thrills, and adults avoided it altogether, crossing themselves or muttering prayers as they passed by. The manor was said to be cursed, haunted by the spirits of the Hollow family, who had once been the wealthiest and most influential family in the region. But their legacy was one of tragedy, murder, madness, and unexplained disappearances. No one who entered the manor ever came out the same, if they came out at all. Maggie Turner had always been drawn to the macabre. As a freelance journalist specializing in the paranormal, she had spent years investigating haunted locations across the country. When she heard about Hollow Hill Manor, she knew she had to see it for herself. The stories were too compelling to ignore. Whispers of shadowy figures, disembodied voices, and a curse that had plagued the town for generations. Maggie arrived in Hollow Hill on a crisp autumn afternoon. The town was picturesque, with its cobblestone streets, quaint shops, and golden leaves falling from the trees. But there was an undercurrent of unease, a tension that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The locals were friendly enough, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes, and their conversations stopped abruptly when Maggie mentioned the manor. She checked into the town's only inn, a cozy place called the Hollow Hill Lodge. The innkeeper, an elderly woman named Mrs. Grayson, gave her a wary look when she introduced herself. "You're here about the manor, aren't you?" Mrs. Grayson asked, her voice tinged with disapproval. Maggie nodded. "I'm writing a piece on haunted locations. I've heard the stories, and I want to see if there's any truth to them." Mrs. Grayson sighed. "That place is no good, dear. It's cursed. Bad things happen to those who go poking around where they don't belong." Maggie smiled politely. "I'll be careful. I just want to take a look." Mrs. Grayson shook her head but said nothing more. She handed Maggie the key to her room and wished her a good stay. The first night. That evening, Maggie sat in her room, poring over the notes she had gathered about the Hollow family. The family had been prominent in the 1800s, known for their wealth and influence. But their fortunes took a dark turn when the patriarch, Elias Hollow, was found dead in his study, his throat slit. His wife, Eleanor, disappeared shortly after, and their children were sent away to live with relatives. The manor had been abandoned ever since. Maggie's research also revealed a pattern of strange occurrences in the town. Over the years, several people had gone missing after visiting the manor, and others had reported seeing shadowy figures in the windows or hearing screams in the night. The locals believed the Hollow family's spirits were trapped in the manor, unable to move on. As the clock struck midnight, Maggie decided to take a walk. She wanted to see the manor for herself, even if it was just from the outside. The night was cold, and the streets were empty as she made her way to the edge of town. The manor loomed in the distance, its silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. The gates were rusted and overgrown with ivy, but they creaked open with a gentle push. Maggie stepped onto the property, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the silence was oppressive. She could feel eyes on her, though she saw no one. As she approached the front door, she noticed something strange. The windows were dark, but she could have sworn she saw movement inside. She shook it off as her imagination and continued forward. The door was unlocked, and it swung open with a loud creak. Maggie stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The interior was in ruins, with broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. But there was something else, a feeling of being watched, of not being alone. She explored the ground floor, taking notes and photographs. The air grew colder with each step, and her breath came out in visible puffs. She was about to head upstairs when she heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, coming from the shadows. "Leave, while you still can." Maggie froze. The voice was soft, but unmistakable. She shone her flashlight in the direction of the sound, but there was nothing there. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had experienced strange things before, but this felt different. More personal, more menacing. She decided to leave for the night, promising herself she would return in the morning. As she stepped outside, she glanced back at the manor. In one of the upstairs windows, she saw a figure, a woman in a flowing white dress, her face pale and sorrowful. Maggie blinked, and the figure was gone. The next day, Maggie visited the town's historical society, hoping to learn more about the Hollow family. The curator, an elderly man named Mr. Whitaker, was more than willing to share what he knew. The Hollows were a tragic family, he said, leading Maggie to a dusty archive room. Elias Hollow was a powerful man, but he was also cruel. He ruled his family with an iron fist, and his wife, Eleanor, suffered the most. She was a kind woman, but she was trapped in a loveless marriage. When Elias was murdered, many believed Eleanor was responsible, but she vanished before she could be questioned. Maggie flipped through old newspaper clippings and photographs. One image caught her eye, a portrait of the Hollow family. Elias stood tall and imposing, his expression cold. Beside him was Eleanor, her eyes downcast, her face etched with sadness. Behind them were their two children, a boy and a girl, both looking solemn. "What happened to the children?" Maggie asked. Mr. Whitaker sighed. "They were sent to live with relatives, but they never recovered from the trauma. The boy, Thomas, died young, and the girl, Abigail, disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Some say she returned to the manor, hoping to find answers about her parents' deaths. Maggie's mind raced. Could the figure she had seen in the window be Abigail, or perhaps Eleanor? She thanked Mr. Whitaker and left, her thoughts consumed by the Hollow family's tragic history. That night, Maggie returned to the manor, this time with a voice recorder and a camera. She was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. The whispers began as soon as she stepped inside, growing louder as she ventured deeper into the house. She made her way to the study where Elias Hollow had been murdered. The room was eerily intact, with a large desk, a bookshelf, and a bloodstain on the floor that had never fully faded. Maggie set up her equipment and began to ask questions. "Is anyone here? My name is Maggie. I want to help you." The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into a cacophony of voices. Maggie's recorder picked up the sound of a woman weeping, followed by a man's angry shout. She felt a sudden pressure on her chest, as if someone or something was pushing her toward the door. "Leave!" the voices screamed. "Leave now!" Maggie stumbled backward, her heart pounding. She grabbed her equipment and ran, the voices echoing in her ears. As she reached the front door, she glanced back and saw them, shadowy figures, their faces twisted in agony, reaching out to her. The next morning, Maggie returned to the manor one last time. She had pieced together the truth. The Hollow family's spirits were trapped in the manor, unable to move on because of the curse that had been placed on them. Elias's cruelty had doomed them all, and Eleanor's sorrow had bound them to the house. Maggie stood in the study, holding a photograph of the Hollow family. "I know what happened," she said softly. "You don't have to suffer anymore. You can let go." The air grew still, and the whispers faded. For a moment, Maggie thought she saw Eleanor's face, her expression peaceful. Then with a soft sigh, the spirits were gone. Maggie left Hollow Hill that afternoon, her notebook filled with stories, and her heart heavy with the weight of what she had witnessed. The manor remained standing, but the curse had been lifted. The townsfolk noticed the change. The air felt lighter, the shadows less menacing. As for Maggie, she knew she would never forget the shadows of Hollow Hill. They had shown her the power of grief, the weight of guilt, and the possibility of redemption. And though she would never return to the manor, she carried its story with her, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there is hope.